a loving mother of 6 from Phoenix, Arizona, was fatally shot in her home in 1998. The name of the shooter remained unknown for more than 2 decades, but the police knew what the suspect looked like. Then, finally, in 2016, the police learned his name, but although they knew who he was, he remained on the loose until he was finally located and brought to justice. On July 9, 1998, at around 11:12 p.m., 28-year-old Sarah Jane Carr was shot inside her home near 14th Street and McDowell Road. A 911 caller told a dispatcher that a girl had been shot and that it was a man that had pulled the trigger. When the Phoenix police officers responded to the scene, as they entered the home, they found Sarah Jane deceased on the ground. She had been fatally shot in the face. The witness who called 911 saw the man who shot her and gave the police a description. The case was turned over to the detectives from the Phoenix Police Department's slaying unit. The original detectives who worked this case only knew the man by his nickname, G. However, they could not find out what the suspect's full name was. The investigation into Sarah's case went cold over the years, as the detectives were not able to identify the person responsible. Then, finally in 2016, the cold case detectives were able to use new technology to connect the shooting to 58-year-old Javier Lorenzano Nunez. The detectives learned that Lorenzano Nunez spent several years in California after he committed the crime before he moved to Mexico. Nearly 10 years after he was identified, the police in Phoenix and the Maricopa County Attorney's Office indicted him and issued an arrest warrant for Sarah's slaying. The detectives contacted the U.S. Justice Department's Office of Internal Affairs, who worked with the law enforcement officials in Mexico to locate and arrest Lorenzano Nunez. The Department of Justice and the U.S. Marshals Service worked to finalize and complete the extradition of 58-year-old Lorenzano Nunez to Phoenix on October 23, 2024. The Phoenix Police Department took custody of Lorenzano Nunez, and he was then booked into jail for the outstanding warrant related to the case. After 26 years, the suspect in the case of Sarah Jane will face accountability and charges related to his actions in July 1998. Peggy Carr, Sarah's sister, said, "I think she was dancing in heaven right now. Sarah Jane was a loving mother to her 6 children. Her children mostly know her through the cherished memories of others. She had a very kind heart." Sarah's daughter, Jessica Miller, said, "She loved the band, Journey. So anytime Journey comes on, it is very hard to listen to, but I always think of her." Sarah's family worried for years that justice would never come, but they never worried about forgetting her. Gregory Miller, her oldest son, who was 11 when she was slain, said, "I remember her always being there, doing right by her kids. She was a great mom. She was really tough." Sarah's other son, Garrett, took his grief and turned it into a mission to serve others as a police officer in Austin, Texas. Garrett said, "Growing up the way I felt of will I ever get justice? Will I ever get closure? I did not like that feeling, and I did not want other people to feel that." A special set of handcuffs were gifted to him after he graduated from the academy. He wanted to use those handcuffs on the man responsible for his mother's demise. Garrett said that it was a pinnacle point for him when he was finally able to hand his handcuffs over to the detective and see the detective trade out the marshal's handcuffs for his handcuffs. Her family was overwhelmed with emotion after they learned that Lorenzano Nunez was charged with slaying. The family's message to others searching for justice in cold cases is to never lose hope and to stay in contact with the detectives investigating these cases, but to also be patient, as justice sometimes takes time. In 1988, a loving son, brother, and friend, as well as a respected teacher and a good neighbor, was brutally taken from this world. Significant forensic evidence led the police to catch the person responsible. 36-year-old Byron Howard Carr was an English teacher at Montague Regional High School. In the early morning hours of November 11, 1988, Byron was strangled with a towel in his bedroom in his home on Lapthorne Avenue, Charlottetown, Canada. His body also had multiple stab wounds. Byron's slaying shook the city, Byron's friends, family, and the LGBTQ community. When his body was found, there was a message written in ink on his wall saying, "I will slay again." The police said that they believe Byron had consensual intercourse with a young man he brought home, and they presumed that the young man was the perpetrator. Byron kept his sexuality a secret, but it was brought to light when he lost his life. Chief Brad McConnell called the era a dark and unfortunate time in Prince Edward Islanders' history that forced people like Byron to socialize in the shadows and take unnecessary risks. This case has been Prince Edward Island's only cold case in modern times. The case remained cold for many years until it was reopened in 2007. The police were pinning their hopes on advances in DNA technology, particularly evidence gathered from underwear found in Byron's home. Genetic genealogy was used to match DNA from the crime scene. Chief McConnell said, "Combining advances in DNA with some genetic genealogy work, we were able to identify one of the individuals associated to those profiles found at the crime scene. Through that, we were able to identify Todd Joseph Gallant as being the donor of the evidence that we believe was deposited by the individual that was with Byron." The police chief said finding a genetic genealogy match can be a painstaking process. It involves collecting DNA samples from crime scene exhibits, generating a genetic profile, then uploading that profile through a law enforcement mechanism to genealogy websites like Family Tree DNA and GED Match. This can eventually lead to a familial DNA match with other samples profiled on those sites. The Charlottetown police were assisted by Wyndham Forensics Group and Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy during the investigation into the case of Byron. Chief McConnell said that Gallant has a previous criminal record in Canada, Texas, and Arkansas. He has previously been convicted of a break and enter in Prince Edward Island in 1987, just a year before the tragic demise of Byron. According to the police, Gallant left the island sometime after 1988 and returned only in 2022. The Charlottetown police are working with other law enforcement agencies to determine a timeline of Gallant's movements over the past 35 years. 56-year-old Todd Joseph Gallant, also known as Todd Joseph Irving, was arrested on January 25, 2024, at around 11:55 a.m. Gallant of Surrey, Prince Edward Island, has been charged with 1 count of first-degree slaying and 1 count of interfering with human remains. Gallant was 21 years old at the time of Byron's brutal slaying. The police also arrested a second suspect the same week, but he was later released. An investigation continued to determine whether he had any involvement in the case. Chief McConnell was asked whether he thought the case was a hate crime, to which he answered, "That particular answer is one we all want to know." The sensational note left on the crime scene would suggest it was. He said Byron's family just wants to know the truth, no matter what it was, as to why Byron's life was so cruelly taken away. Was it just a hate crime, or were there other factors involved? It has been a long 35 years of unanswered questions and not knowing who the person responsible was. Byron's family is sad that the case took 35 years to make any progress, as Byron's mother and father had since passed away without knowing the truth behind what happened to their son. Byron's brother, John Carr, thanked the police and members of the public for their hard work and dedication to his brother's case. Gallant pleaded not guilty to the slaying of Byron in a Prince Edward Island courtroom. The case was adjourned multiple times so lawyers could receive disclosure. Gallant's lawyer, Chris Montagny, appeared on behalf of Gallant in court on July 4, 2024. His lawyer waived the need for a preliminary hearing, which is a hearing held by the court to determine whether there is enough evidence to send the case to trial. This was the 8th time Gallant's case has been called before the court since his arrest back in January. Gallant will return to court on December 10, 2024. Amber Lynn, Jenkins Garcia's body, was discovered nearly 26 years ago near a wooded area in Morgan City, Louisiana in 1998. At around the same time, another woman's body was also found. The perpetrator responsible for the crime on the second victim has been sentenced, but the person responsible for the slaying of Amber remained unknown for many years. That was until a connection was made between the two cases. On October 8, 1998, the Morgan City Police Department responded to Young's Road regarding a body that had been discovered behind Young's Park near the wooded area. When the officers arrived at the scene, they found the body of Amber Lynn Jenkins Garcia. The investigation commenced with the Morgan City Police Department Detectives Division when it was determined that Amber's demise was the result of a slaying. During the course of the investigation, the investigators collected multiple sources of evidence to be analyzed by criminal specialists. As the investigation continued, information and leads turned cold, and the investigators were unable to make a determination of who was responsible for Amber's demise. Just later that same year, on December 25, 1998, investigators with the Morgan City Police Department responded to the area of Duke Street regarding the body of another female victim that has been found. The investigators determined that the body they found was that of Jennifer Vidal. Her demise was also a result of slaying. The investigators identified John Willis Pittman Jr. as a suspect in the slaying case of Jennifer. Pittman was 18 years old at the time of the slaying. He was then charged, and he later pleaded guilty in the 16th Judicial Court to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 40 years at hard labor and was taken into custody by the Louisiana Department of Corrections. Over the years, the investigators looked at Amber's case to see if new leads could be developed regarding her demise. In the beginning of 2024, the investigators in Morgan City solved a slaying from a quarter century ago and did not have to go far to find their suspect. The investigators with the Morgan City Police Department Detectives Division resubmitted evidence collected from the crime scene of Amber to the Acadiana Criminalistics Lab. Over the years, with technology advancement in this field, the results yielded that the DNA collected from the scene linked John Willis Pittman Jr. to Amber's case. Thanks to the new evidence, the investigation was once again rejuvenated. The investigators obtained an arrest warrant for Pittman's arrest on the charges of second-degree slaying for the case that happened 26 years ago. Pittman, who is still incarcerated at Elaine Hunt Correctional Center for the slaying of Jennifer Vidal, will be charged with the demise of Amber as well. Pittman remains incarcerated and will be booked on the new charges while he will await court proceedings in the 16th Judicial Court. Chief Chad M. Adams and the Morgan City Police Department would like to commend all their investigators, from the ones that were involved in the original investigation to the ones that looked at the case over the years since, and to the current investigators who have completed the task bringing this heinous slaying investigation to a conclusion. The work that all these investigators have done has brought justice to not only Amber, but to the family she had left behind. She was a daughter and a mother. As this investigation comes to a close, Chief Adams and investigators with the Morgan City Police Department have been in touch and met with the family of Amber. Amber's family is relieved and very grateful that her case has finally been solved. The remains of an unidentified man were found in a field in Markham, Ontario, Canada, in July 1980. The individual became known as Markham Doe, and his identity remained a mystery until he was identified with the help of new DNA technology. In July 1980, the grisly discovery of remains of an unidentified individual were made on the side of the 11th concession between 14th Avenue and Steeles Avenue in Markham, Ontario, Canada. The discovery was made by a local resident. At the start of the investigation, the investigators had little to go on. At the time, it was determined that the remains were that of a white male who was between the ages of 25 and 40 years. Unable to identify the man, he became known as Markham Doe. The long delay in discovering the identity of the man was down to the condition of the body when it was discovered. The body was badly decomposed, and there was zero chance of getting a physical identification. Markham Doe weighed approximately 100 to 120 pounds, was 5 feet 6 inches tall, and had dark brown, medium-length hair. The investigation into Markham Doe's identity was led by the York Regional Police. Markham Doe's remains were interred at Mount Pleasant Cemetery, when in 2007, the York Regional Police Cold Case Unit performed an exhumation so that a facial reconstruction could be developed. Skeletal evidence was also obtained for the purpose of DNA testing. A year later, a traditional DNA profile was developed and uploaded to the National DNA Database, but there was no match to a known individual. In June 2022, York Regional Police teamed with Othram. Forensic evidence was sent to Othram's laboratory, and Othram scientists successfully developed a suitable DNA extract for Markham Doe. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the individual. This profile was returned to the investigators with the York Regional Police so that a forensic genetic genealogy search could be conducted. This search led to the development of new leads in the case. The leads enabled a follow-up investigation, which led to possible relatives of Markham Doe. On April 3, 2023, Markham Doe was identified as 26-year-old William Joseph Pennel of Toronto, Ontario. Joseph had never been reported missing over the years. In November 2024, the detectives announced what they learned during their further investigation. William had been in prison for a variety of criminal offenses, including armed robbery, which was committed while he was out on parole. Because he violated his parole, he was then returned to Collins Bay Institution in Kingston. There, he told his case officers that there were two others involved in the armed robbery of a Brampton Becker's store. William admitted to his role in the crime, but he refused to identify his accomplices. He told his case officers that if he funked, his life would be in danger. He was convicted of the Becker's job in April 1980. 2 months later, he escaped from prison. Records of the escape appear to have been lost. William apparently told a friend that he was planning to escape to South America. That was reportedly his last contact before the unidentified remains were discovered a month later. After more than 4 decades, Markham Doe has finally been identified. In August of 1934, Idaho's first full-time fish and game officer disappeared while he was on a trip to investigate illegal hunting near an area called Boulder Gulch in the mountains south of Mullen, Idaho. Ellsworth Teed failed to return home, and his disappearance remained a mystery for nearly 90 years. Ellsworth Arthur Teed grew up in Clearwater County and worked in the mines for many years. He then moved to Shoshone County and took on the job of game warden. Ellsworth disappeared in August of 1934 in a heavily forested area near Mullen, 100 miles southeast of Sandpoint. He got a call that there may have been illegal hunting of deer and game birds in the area. He had found evidence the previous day and went back out to Boulder Gulch to catch the poachers. Before he left, he said goodbye to his wife, Alma, and headed out in his Model A Ford with a packed lunch. He parked his car at the Mullen Cemetery near the base of Boulder Creek Road and hiked into the forested area. Ellsworth never came back, and his family never heard from him again. Alma told the officers investigating the disappearance of her husband that he would always tell her if he was going to be away overnight, and it was unlike him to disappear without notifying her. Ellsworth was expected to attend a neighbor's funeral later in the afternoon of August 28th. It was a service he would not have missed. Alma feared that he had been hurt in an accident or had met with violence at the hands of others. The city, county, and state officers, along with hundreds of volunteers, released from their shifts at the Morning Mine in Mullen, the Bunker Hill Mine in Kellogg, and the Hecla Mine in Burke, combed the hills. They searched for Ellsworth tirelessly. They even used bloodhounds and airplanes during the search. It was one of Shoshone County's largest recorded manhunts. When the officials combed Mullen, they found Ellsworth's packed lunch and his coat inside his locked car. They also discovered shallow graves of deceased deer and evidence of closed-season harvesting of game birds in the area Ellsworth was searching for the poachers, something that indicated that he may have been interrupted during his investigation. The case of Ellsworth was considered to be the state's oldest active cold case. Though the body of Ellsworth Arthur Teed has never been found, his demise has long been considered a slaying. Ellsworth was reportedly slain by the very group he was looking for, and these rumors swirled about in the Mullen community for decades, but could not be corroborated due to his body that has never been found. Alma declared her husband deceased in a court of law on February 6, 1942, 8 years after his disappearance. She was awarded spousal benefits. That is where the case sat, stagnant, until decades later. The story of the missing warden had been passed down through generations over the years. Each person had an extensive, detailed account of the alleged slaying of Ellsworth, and those accounts were all corroborated. Finally, in 2023, investigators believe they have solved the Great Depression-era cold case of the Idaho game warden who vanished in the mountains. In February 2023, Idaho Fish and Game accepted Ellsworth into the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and Idaho Peace Officers Memorial to honor his service when he was lost in the line of duty that day in 1934. His award was covered by local news stations, prompting people to reach out to the sheriff's office about what they were told happened to him all those years ago. 4 people came forward with information about what they had heard happened. George Petland, his teenage son, John Robert Petland, and another teen, Oscar Downing, were poaching deer in the Mullen area and came across Ellsworth. Petland ended Ellsworth's life, and the 2 boys helped dispose of his body. Captain Seth Green from the Shoshone County Sheriff's Department said in a statement in February 2024, "We went down and verified people's family trees. They all did interviews, and according to them, the suspect told people, and the story was passed down. We also knew they would not have been able to hear it from each other. That is something you have to watch out for. So we are closing the case. 4 people who all said the same thing. That is the best you can get for such an old case." Captain Green said the sheriff's office will not be releasing witness statements or any more detail into the alleged slaying. Officials also will not be going out to conduct a search for Ellsworth's remains. The area has had its fair share of fires and heavy rains, which could have moved the remains to a completely different area. The chances of finding him is slim to none. Captain Green said it feels good to have tracked down answers. Ellsworth's remaining family is relieved to finally close a 90-year mystery. Adeline Watkins, an investigator with Idaho Fish and Game, said the case is so unique because of how long ago Ellsworth went missing. There are no police reports investigators could locate, so most of their knowledge was through newspaper records and word of mouth. Watkins still hopes more people come forward with additional information, even though the case is considered closed, and was happy to bring the Teed family some much-needed answers and closure. Ellsworth was the great-uncle of Melissa Sellers Teed's husband. She knew his 3 sons. She said that they often discussed their father and how they wished they knew what happened to him. When he disappeared, his sons were between the ages of 8 and 14. They were all extremely close with their father. Melissa said, "It was heartbreaking. The family was ruined from losing him. It was a sad story for years." Melissa said Ellsworth's one son was in his 80s when he passed away. Just before he passed, he was tearing up and crying, wishing he knew what happened to his father. She wishes his family had closure before they passed away like they did. Melissa said that she is most grateful for the investigators and the people that came forward to help a family.